Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is great to be here with you today. We are going to talk today about how prepared you are for the future. Now, I've done a lot of work over the years with data companies, with privacy, and a lot of innovation. And here's the way most people in the data space view their jobs. So when you first start, you're pretty excited. You start doing things. You're like, I'm really going to make a change in this organisation. And there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm. And then, little by little, things start to slow down until this happens. Sharktopus, ladies and gentlemen. Half shark, half octopus. One of the great movies in the half shark, half octopus genres. So I highly recommend it. So Sharktopus is an analogy for the complacency that we have in any job that we take on. We just get a little bit focused on the business as usual, and it's very difficult to look over the horizon. And so today, I'm going to reflect on what I'm sure you've heard a lot about, which is we all need an AI strategy, no matter what line of work you are in. And I appreciate that for some of you, there'll be a strong sort of visceral feeling, this isn't going to happen. This whole AI thing, it's like these same 10 presenters who are talking about AI today, last year were telling me that blockchain is going to change my world. And you know what? That didn't happen. So I appreciate that some of you will have a very strong feeling that AI is overhyped. And can I just ask you to bear with me? Because I once had a very strong feeling like that as well. I once believed that Excel spreadsheeting was something that should only be done alone at one's computer and was not a televisual event until 3 months ago. Ladies and gentlemen, this happened. This is the World Excel eSport Championship, which was broadcast live on ESPN. So this is live spreadsheeting. There are your masters there of the fine art of the Excel. And you should really have a look at it because some of the pivot table work was unbelievable, just sublime. The sum all function, who knew what could happen? So I never thought spreadsheeting could be a global sporting event. And so I would ask you to come along today with my story as to why I think AI will change the world of data, records, and information management. Just a little bit of a backstory. So I'm not coming to you today as some Johnny-come-lately to the records and information management world. I have done my time. Very hard time, can I say, too. Let me take you back to 2002. Now, 2002, just to put that into context, at 2002, the way many of us used to spend our early Saturday evening was to go to the video store and choose a video, take about 20 minutes, and then come home with a video and watch that video. So well before streaming, I appreciate some of the younger people in the audience find this archaic, and who is this caveman speaking to us? But that was 2002. And so I was working as a partner for a law firm called Anderson Legal. Anderson Legal was associated with the once great professional services firm, Anderson. Anderson, 80,000 people, had been going for 85 years. Until the Enron issue. So Enron, some people may remember, Enron was sort of an energy company, did some naughty things, collapsed, was being investigated by the SEC. Anderson had been its auditor out of Texas. And what, oops indeed, we should have thought that through. So one day, whilst the SEC is investigating it, a young lady in the records management area of Anderson sent an email to a fellow called David Duncan, who was the head of the Enron audit engagement team for Anderson. He was located in Houston. That email was very simple. That email said, David, the SEC are investigating, remember the document retention policy. Now, clearly in Texas, a document retention policy means something different to the rest of us, because David Duncan interpreted that by way of getting the shredders going day and night and just started shredding documents. The SEC got wind of the fact that Anderson was shredding documents, and the SEC brought suit against Anderson and indicted Anderson. Now, for those of you who haven't had the pleasure of being in a partnership that gets indicted in the US, what that means is that every partner is personally indicted. Now, that has some ramifications in a big professional services environment. So if you are criminally indicted, you can't sign off on audit accounts. So literally, clients deserted Anderson in droves over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, and Anderson collapsed a month later. 80,000 people, including me, out of work, all because of that email. Ultimately, that went through the courts. I mean, we all had to get new gigs. Anderson collapsed, but we all had to get new jobs. That went through the courts. The rump of Anderson, the sort of legacy, if you like, continued to pursue and defend the action that the SEC had brought. And ultimately, in the Supreme Court of America, only 6 years ago, was completely vindicated. Because all that David Duncan had been shredding were immaterial work papers and duplicates. But the visual of that was too much for the SEC, and they responded very quickly. And so records and information management is incredibly important. And we all need to recognise how critical that can be for an organisation. In this case, it cost billions of dollars of value to be evaporated. As a result of this, I became fascinated with data law and privacy. And so can I just say how exciting it is to be here at RIMPA and to see 550 people registered. RIMPA even has its own mascot. So can I say speaking at a data conference back in 2003 was not quite the same as this. So I was invited to speak at a conference, and I said, well, I'd like to speak on data and privacy law. And it was a technology conference. They were like, okay, whatever. And so I arrived expecting it would be in an auditorium. In fact, no, it was in the exhibition space. It was just a little sort of pitch booth that I was going to speak at. So I was a very energetic young lawyer, so I just got there and there was no one sitting there. And so I started talking about privacy and data law. And there was no one there. And 20 minutes later, there was no one there. But I continued on. I was going to tell my data and privacy law story. And, we're about 25 minutes in. A lady comes and turns up. I'm like, I've got an audience. See, it only takes one. And so I decided to go off script and I engaged with the audience. I said, so, do you have an interest in privacy and data law? And she said, no, I'm speaking after you. So can I just say, this is fantastic, but please, those of you that are relatively new to the records and information management world, don't think it was always like this. Why is it so popular now? I have my own theory on this. Because data is critical now to the operation of all organisations. And I believe it's because we're seeing the convergence of 3 particular technologies. So screen-based communications, robotics, and of course, artificial intelligence. So if we look at screen-based communications, so where is the world at on that? We all started working from home, and that got really well embraced. And I just read today that CEOs, there's a sort of a gathering of CEOs, and they said that working remotely will be gone in 3 years. And I feel like that is incredible wishful thinking from those CEOs. I feel like they want it gone tomorrow. I completely get that. But the reality is completely different. Because we are, I believe, on the edge of reality. Because many of us, particularly those of us of a certain age, think of reality as the hard, tangible reality that we see in front of us. But that's not necessarily the way younger generations see a reality. And some of you may have noticed with your kids, you know, and they get their friends, come over for a bit of a play date, and it's lovely to see them interacting. You know, and they're having such a lovely time together. But screens, we have put screens in their hands from when they were 18 months. And that has ramifications. And I'm not judging it, because I think it's unfair to judge. You know, there's lots of people like, they should be out camping. It's like, how many times did you go camping when you were a kid? You know, you can't judge. The reality is they've had the screens forever. They're very good at interacting through screens, and screens are absolutely the future reality. There's some phenomenal research on this, and I think it's the best stuff that's done. It was done by an organisation called Coefficient Capital. They spent a lot of money, and they put a bunch of questions out to a very large cohort of people. And I'd just like to run you through, because these answers are surprising, I think. So one of the questions they asked was, do you feel most like yourself when you're online? Now, for those of us of a certain age, that's a ludicrous proposition, because of course we feel most like ourselves in this reality that we're in today. And yet 45% so Gen Z, so age between 10 and 25, and effectively 45% of the millennials, so 26 to 40, so 45% of people aged between 10 and 40 believe they felt most like themselves when they were online. So they have an online persona which is so strong that it eclipses their offline component. The next question, I feel more valued for my talents online rather than offline. Once again, 45% of that 10 to 40-year-old cohort feel more valued for their talents online. And you can totally see that. I mean, if you are working in a cafe and you're on minimum wage, it's not particularly glamorous, but you're a micro-influencer on Instagram and you've got 1,000 followers and you put up a photograph of you at the beach and you get 100 likes. I mean, it's basic chemistry. The dopamine that you get from those 100 likes makes you feel great, far better than you feel going and schlepping around asking people what coffees they want. And the final one, which I find astounding, I met my closest friends online, not offline. And once again, for the everyone should be camping and out playing in the street people, this will be a bizarre notion. And yet between 35 and 40% of that 10 to 40-year-old cohort met their closest friends online. And I mention this stat particularly when I'm talking to people just generally, because I'm interested in how they respond to it. And just yesterday I was speaking to a woman who's 26, and there was a group of us, we're having a chat, and I said, what about this stat? And a few people were like, oh, that's ridiculous. And this 26-year-old woman said, oh no, that totally happened to me. So for her, her best friend ever moved away, and so she was kind of blessed without her wing person. And so she went on Bumble, and so Bumble is a dating app, but also has a friend element to it, so that you can use it for dating. You can also use it to find friends. So she found literally her best friend on Bumble. So, the whole idea of these CEOs going, you know what, we're all going to come back to the office. That is absolutely flawed thinking, because this generation, anyone below the age of 40, is comfortable building relationships through screens. I mean, here's a new dating app. This isn't just, I'm not doing a session on dating apps. It might seem like that, but this is a new dating app. Not that I'm on it, but so this is called Snack. I think this one's fantastic. So what happens is, and they say not your parents' dating app. So yeah, when I got married, there was no dating apps going on there. But anyway, that's their tagline. And what happens with Snap is, for those of you too busy to go on a date, you get your AI-enabled avatar to go on a date with the person who you've linked with, their AI-enabled avatars. And if your avatars get along, well, you know what? Maybe you should meet for a coffee. So, the idea that we're all coming back to the office because we love working in the office, that ain't happening. So I have been around the virtual world space for a while, and there's a virtual world called Second Life, which was big 10 years ago. See, some people remember it. So 10 years ago, Second Life was huge. It was going to replace e-commerce, it was going to replace meetings, and it was effectively this. You got an avatar and you could meet in a virtual environment. And clients of mine were spending millions of dollars building e-commerce capabilities in Second Life, and I became one of Australia's leading experts in the law of Second Life. One day, one of my clients contacted me and said, we're opening our e-commerce facility, would you speak at the opening? And I'm like, oh, okay, but I don't know much about playing the game. I knew a lot about the law of it, but I figured out how to play it and make my little avatar move. And so the day comes, I'm a little apprehensive, I put my headset on so I can talk and so forth, and then I get my avatar and I sort of manage to get it into the place where my client is having this function. And I my avatar walks in to an auditorium that's like this, and I turn him around, and it's as big as this, and there's 200 avatars, and there is every wacky creature you could imagine. You know, there's gorillas, there's angels, there's bikies, Moses. It's just a whole range. I mean, people, when left to their own devices, come up with some very strange ideas. Anyway, I'm like, okay, I better show that I understand how this technology works. And so there was a chair actually on the stage, not dissimilar to this chair here. Thank you for setting this up. And so I decided I'm going to make my avatar sit on the chair. So I walk him over and then I press the sit down command. Now, unfortunately, I must have pressed the lie down command because he lay down underneath the chair. And so my avatar's there underneath the chair looking at everyone, and there's an audible sort of gasp. Moses goes, what's happening? And so I then pressed the stand-up command. I remembered where that was. Now here's a design flaw for you. So the stand-up command, when pressed, causes my avatar to hit his head on the underside of the chair. And I naturally, it's a bit like calling a lift, I naturally think that the faster that I press that button, the more likely that my avatar will return to standing. Unfortunately, my avatar ends up having a fit under the chair. And so this, 200 other avatars are looking at this expert in Second Life trapped under the presentation chair. So that was very humiliating indeed, but nowhere near as humiliating as spending the next 30 minutes delivering a speech while stuck under the presentation chair. But that's the sort of person I am. These people needed to learn. I delivered a speech about privacy to no one for 30 minutes. I can do it trapped under a chair, no problems. So I come to the end and, I'm a very positive person. I log out, I take my headset off, and I'm like, I don't have to remember that ever. I will just blank that out of my memory until moments later, a friend of mine sends me this screenshot of me trapped under the presentation chair whilst delivering a session on opportunities and risks for companies in Second Life. Well, I think I made the risks pretty evident. So really, I mean, the reason I tell that story is because my therapist encourages me to share it because it takes the blame and the guilt and the shame that I feel about it. But also, I do encourage people to try to embrace new technologies, AI, virtual worlds and so forth, because whilst you might feel a bit stupid using it at the beginning, nothing is as bad as this. So that's the bar, and you won't be able to get over that bar, I assure you. Let's talk about robotics, because I think robotics is really a fascinating area, and we're seeing the early stages of quite sophisticated use of robotics in chatbots. So we've obviously got all the banks doing their chatbot work. We've seen governments embrace it. Singapore this was Jamie, the Singapore government's chatbot, and Jamie was going gangbusters until towards the end of the COVID epidemic, someone asked Jamie about what they should do to not get COVID, and Jamie started talking about the best way to put a condom on, and so that was a bit of a programming glitch. And that didn't go down super well with the Singaporean government. And so Jamie got pulled off, and we haven't seen Jamie since. So Jamie the chatbot, no more. We've got Magella. So Magella is a fake influencer. I mean, they're all fake, but don't get me wrong, they're all fake, right? That's a fake game. I think it's unlikely we've got influencers in the RIMPA audience, but this is Magella. So she is fake. So she's completely made up, but she has done big big campaigns for Calvin Klein, Samsung, etc. And so she's a very, very lucrative property, and the company that created her, the production company, just sold for £100 million. So she is a very, very impressive use case for what can happen with this sort of technology. What I do like about this too is, I mean, she's clearly able to demonstrate human traits. I particularly like that feeling that we all have when that shoe that we ordered from Balenciaga is a bit too big. Oh no, I'm gonna have to send this one back. That'll be a big box. So I just want to ask a question, which if Joe Kane is in the audience, sorry Joe, I suspect this question has never been asked at RIMPA before, but who thinks they could fall in love with a robot? Not a lot of hands going up? No, I asked this at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and a lady just shouted out immediately, "Yeah, my husband." So I think I might have triggered something there. So the question, could you fall in love with a robot? And of course we all think no. But I'd like you to just look at this footage. So this footage is of Atlas, which is the robot which you've probably seen on social media. It's from Boston Dynamics, it does backflips, parkour. It's incredibly agile. And I'll just let you have a look at this. He seems to be enjoying that a bit much, that handler, doesn't he? Hands up, who felt sorry for Atlas? Okay, and those with your hands down, you want to put your hands up, but you feel like you'd be a weirdo if you did. I get it, I understand, it doesn't feel right, but that's a robot, and yet we ascribe to it human emotions. And so that is where we are headed in terms of as robotics comes more into our daily lives. The way that we think about them, we will humanize them. I don't want to trigger anyone, but I think it's important. I just want to show you that the bullying actually continued a couple of weeks later with Atlas. Look at that. The crowd applauds when the robots beat up the humans. I don't think that's been a Hollywood movie ever. So isn't it interesting how we are as humans that we're all rooting for Atlas there because we don't like to see anything mistreated. So it's going to be a fascinating world for us. It was mentioned just as I was coming on that I created a chatbot a few years ago. Now it was the first AI-enabled privacy chatbot in the world, and looking back on it, it was relatively simplistic. We called it Parker, and it's just a great example of what can be achieved with chatbot technology. So this is 3 years ago, and I built it myself, and I'm not a programmer. I built it with a colleague who's also not a programmer. It took about 30 or 40 hours to get all the information into it, but it was incredibly successful. On day one of Parker being live, it helped out over 1,000 people, delivered over 40 hours of legal information, was smarter at the end of the day than it was at the beginning of the day, and all up in license fees, it cost us $9.50. So because it's just a chatbot as a service platform, it was just very easy. I was just working with templates, just putting information in. We ended up rolling out iterations of Parker globally through the firm, and it was operating in 7 countries. So the technology is very accessible now, and I'd encourage people, particularly if you are trying to manage questions from the business around what to do with various things, using chatbot technology can be a way of answering what I call the 10 most annoying frequently asked questions. And I've done a lot of work with, particularly with law firms, or not law firms, but legal teams within organisations, because they get asked a lot of questions about policies and who can sign what, can we destroy this document? etc. And so we start off, the basic way of working into that is you do sort of the 10 most annoying frequently asked questions. You make that available to everyone. You direct the business to that. Obviously, if they need assistance after that, you can help. Then there's a simplification process you can do with your policy. So things like, data retention policies, I appreciate, can be, very difficult to get populated through the organisation or socialised. So chatbots are at least starting with frequently asked questions and so forth, and simplification of policies, where you basically simplify 80% of what is a very complex policy. You can simplify 80% of most policies into 1 or 2 pages, often with diagrams. There's 20% of the policy which will be complex, and you sort of need the policy to work with that. But those sorts of projects, from an innovation point of view, I've had great success with helping organisations roll out, and I do recommend it. So just the final part on robotics. I think that not only are we creating robots, but also there's elements of robotics becoming part of us. And we've got Elon Musk working on Neuralink, which is his brain-machine interface solution, which is coming along well, according to Elon. So, we will start to see technology actually becoming part of us. And this is a fascinating company. It's called Epicenter, and so they are based in the US. And when you join Epicenter, there's a little RFID chip which is embedded in the webbing in your hand, and you use that to access the premises, you use that to access your computer, everything you need to validate yourself, you use that particular RFID chip. So it's incredible. I mean, I think when you leave, I understand the exit interview is pretty unpleasant, but yeah, that's sort of where we're headed in terms of the integration of human and technology. Now, I know you've heard lots about AI today and over the course of this conference. I'm going to touch on some things, and we'll sort of work through into what is the human element, because I think that's where I think we can really shine, because I'm not a believer that AI, means we're all out of jobs. In fact, quite the contrary. So if we look at generative AI, so ChatGPT came on the scene November last year. It's really made an impact. But there's 2 very powerful studies done by credible universities around what was the impact of that on knowledge workers. And it is incredible. I mean, they found 35 to 50% increase in productivity, as well as higher performance and higher satisfaction. So, these tools are incredible. They can really help us when used as tools. And if we think about that 35 to 50% increase in productivity, and you compare that with what the addition of steam power did, back in the 1800s, that only added 25% to productivity. So this is a threshold moment, where we actually go into, I think, another type of technology revolution. And for those of you that, hopefully most of you have used it, because I think it's critical, but it is incredible. It's very intuitive to use, and it is like having, a very patient friend with excellent manners and incredible patience. So, you can ask it the same question any number of times. Obviously, it has a bit of a Pinocchio effect. It lies a lot, so you need to be very careful with using the output of it, but it is impressive. If I look at sort of how I see clients that have been rolling out generative AI, and maybe the first area, so it was mentioned, I have a side business called LawPath. I think it was mentioned that there's 250 customers. We've actually got over 400,000 customers, so we're doing better than 250 customers. That business has been going 10 years, and what it does is it aims to make legal easy for micro businesses, so businesses from 1 to 30 people. And so, as I said, we've got 400,000 customers, and that business is going okay these days. But we used to have 3 people generating social media content, because we get a lot of organic traffic to the site from, it's BuzzFeed law content, like the 5 things you need to know about employment agreements, etc. So we used to have 3 people doing that. We've now got just 1 person doing that, and we've doubled the amount of content that we are creating because we're using ChatGPT, because it is perfect for that sort of high-level content. It really fails when you get to detailed content and legal advice and things like that. It's not very good at all. But high-level stuff, it can do a very nice job of that. So So there's a real impact there, I think, in terms of marketing departments, HR departments, doing job descriptions and so forth. That's very easy for it. And also with doing things like first passes of documents. So at LawPath, we were amongst the first to actually launch our own generative AI solution, which is confidential. So the problem, of course, with ChatGPT is anything you put into it actually is used to train the algorithm, so you can't trust it. So I'm sure everyone realises we shouldn't be putting anything confidential. So at LawPath, we created an AI solution which is built on ChatGPT, but there's assured confidentiality. And ChatGPT has been built with APIs that make it relatively easy to do that. And so as a result, I've been able to see firsthand how people use it. And it's unbelievably great at policy creation. So, if you need to create a policy about something, it is fantastic. So a client of mine who's very big in cryptography needed for a client that he was deploying to a cryptography policy. And that's a very niche area, right? There's not very many people who know enough. And there's basically 3 big global conventions on cryptography that you need to be across. And so he said if he had drafted that himself, that would have been 20 to 30 hours worth of work. Using ChatGPT, he got a policy done in under an hour. So, that's exponential, the capability. It's unbelievably great at policies. And then what it's fantastic at is simplifying policies, because every policy that every organisation has ever created is too long. It's just the way of policies. Using a generative AI solution to essentialise, as our American friends like to say, if you can essentialise that, it is incredibly good at those sorts of things. I mean, I know just before lunch, people were talking about AI co-pilots. So my belief is there are going to be a couple of AI pure plays out there, pure play companies. But I think the reality is AI is going to be table stakes for every big technology vendor. So Salesforce has it, Microsoft has it, Google has it, AWS has it. Everyone has their AI co-pilot. So I think this idea that we're going to have a surge of early stage companies that create a real mark in the AI space. There may be some in very, very specific niches, but I think that's going to be hard. I think what we're going to see is the big tech companies will embrace the technology and just make it easy for us to use. Because I'm sure what you've found is it's very difficult to get the technology team to add anything new to the stack. So if you want to add a new vendor to the technology stack of your organisation, that is a difficult proposition. But if it's just, it's Microsoft have this capability, it's running through Office 365 or however, you'll find you're pushing against an open door there. So that's my belief, and what I'm seeing with clients, that's how they're approaching it, and very few of them are spending buckets of money creating AI solutions. Microsoft, for any big organisations, you can already use their generative AI co-pilot. It's already available in pilot for most large organisations. So I wouldn't be spending large amounts of money right now, because it's going to become just a very standard add-on to most of your existing platform. We know that it learns quick, and you may have heard this stat before, but with 3.5, OpenAI or ChatGPT 3.5, which came out in November last year, it sat what's known as the Universal Bar Exam, which is the bar exam that's used in 45 US states for lawyers to pass to become lawyers, and it got less than 10%. So it was a terrible, terrible fail on that. And then version 4 came out 3 months later, and it got 90%. So after 3 months, it was smart enough to go from 10% to 90%. And once again, it would have been specifically trained on passing the Universal Bar Exam, but that's what you can do. You can just train these models very quickly. So there's a lot of stats that are coming out around, AI is coming for our jobs, and Goldman Sachs had a report which said 44% of what lawyers do can be done by AI. So thanks to the investment bankers for that vote of confidence in what it is that we do. So the natural response to all of this hullabaloo, I think, is, oh my God, it's taking over everything, we're going to lose our jobs. But that's just not true. That is not what's going to happen. I mean, that Goldman Sachs stat is ridiculous. And I've looked into it. There's no justification for it. It assumes that, what lawyers do is just, document creation automatons that just, generate standard documents day in, day out. What we do is very different. What you do is very different. It's very nuanced. And so AI isn't replacing everyone's job. It is a tool, like every other tool. Like Excel. Excel is incredible. But Excel didn't mean less accountants. Excel just supercharged accountants. So now, when you want to look at your business through a number of different parameters, you can do it just immediately. And that's because of the power of Excel. And AI will be the same. And, can I just ask a question? Because some people feel pretty strongly about this. Is there anyone who thinks that calculators made kids pretty dumb at maths? Have you had that experience where you're at the shop and it's $3.40 and you give them $5 and two 20-cent pieces, and the 18-year-old's head explodes? Well, there we are. What am I going to do with that? So, there is a belief that calculators makes kids dumb at maths. The truth of the matter is, actually, no. Calculators are incredibly helpful. And there's a load of research on this. You can check it out yourself. What it shows is that the use of calculators has meant that, and when you assess a kid's ability with maths without calculators in a pre-calculated time, and what kids are now doing with calculators, they are far more advanced. They are dealing with maths that is far more advanced conceptually than kids that are not using calculators. So the belief is, from educators, is that calculators, correctly used, are incredibly valuable. And so that's what AI will become. It's an incredible tool. Now, I know this answer. Does anyone get anxious when the plane is on autopilot? Look at that, we don't care. I'm very sorry about the story I'm about to tell you. But probably try to block this out of your mind as you're flying home. This should be a trigger warning. If you're a nervous flyer, probably don't listen. So, autopilot. Autopilot's been around forever. It is the classic example of automation. It's unbelievable. But autopilot didn't lead to us not having, or to pilots getting out of a job. No, autopilot meant it just became easier to run airlines. Alan Joyce. And so, we've consequently had flying has actually become, well, I was going to say cheaper, used to be cheaper, maybe will be one day again. But autopilot has been fantastic. So automation, tick, fantastic. But autopilot suffers from, and I love this term, it's known as the paradox of almost totally safe systems. Anyone worried right at the moment? So the paradox of almost totally safe systems is best explained by this story. So an Air France flight, this is back in 2009, so it was a little while ago. An Air France flight is up, it's flying, what happens every day of the week with hundreds of thousands of airliners around the world. Flying along, it's in autopilot because that's what happens. I mean, when you after takeoff and landing, for the most part, the plane is operating in autopilot. Fine. But then something happens. So there's some ice intermittently forming on the sensors. And it's throwing odd data back to the autopilot system. The autopilot system, as it is trained to do, when it gets wacky data, throws itself off, turns off. And so the pilots are then surprised because they weren't expecting it, and they have to take over manually. Now, here's the thing, that because they've been flying, up at altitude, straight and level for decades with autopilot, no one really does much training for flying at that altitude, straight and level. And there's some idiosyncrasies around how planes behave at that height. And the unfortunate aspect of this is that the pilot who took over just made a couple of critical errors, which were completely rookie errors that no pilot should have ever made, but he hadn't been flying at that height. And you know, it was a pretty critical situation. Things were happening quite quickly. And so the pilot put the plane into a stall, and that plane crashed. After that, there was a big investigation, and now the FAA requires that, and I love it, all pilots need to do an amount of hand flying to prevent erosion of basic piloting skills. And so, I mean, I tell you that story not to upset you, but to give you a sense of this idea that AI is coming for everything and all of our jobs is just ludicrous, because we are always going to need to be there. And we can use it as a tool, that will be fantastic. But there is the need for us all to continue to stay skilled, because there'll be a time when it's necessary. Now they're talking about planes with no pilots. Anyone want to fly on a plane with no pilots after that? Here we go. I think I might have stacked the deck on that question. So my takeaway here is we use AI like a calculator, and we just recognise the learning from autopilot, which is we can't de-skill our people. And in a big law firm like mine, we've got 7,000 people. We've got to make sure that our lawyers are using AI correctly, that they're growing up, that they still understand how to draft a document, how to understand privacy law, etc. So getting to the human factors and the skills that I think you will need to thrive in this environment. As I said, I'm a huge believer in the fact that this will be a great tool for us, and there's great opportunities. But I think for all of us, we can't be blind. We can't be blind to it. We need to embrace it. But in addition to embracing it, we focus on the things that make us great as humans, and that we can provide great services and solutions to our customers and our stakeholders internally. And so those 5 are service, communication, adaptability, leadership, and relationships. Let's drop into those in a little bit of detail. So service. So how do we enrich the customer experience in an environment that now is just obsessed with speed? At one level you're like, oh my God, how can we possibly compete? And so to give you some sense of what's possible, travel agents. How do travel agents still exist? We've been able to book travel online now for over 2 decades. Pretty simple, and yet in 2020, 1/3 of the travel expense in the US was done via travel agents. Flight Centre, an Australian company, effectively a travel agent, is worth $4 billion. And why do they survive? They survive because they deal with humans. And humans don't necessarily want to deal with machines all the time. Like you might want to do a Gold Coast to Melbourne flight online, but if you want to go on the trip of a lifetime, you may want to work with a travel agent. So they have figured out that there is a huge value proposition in their service component. Also trust. So LawPath, my business. So this is separate to Norton Rose, and I started it 10 years ago. And about 5 years ago, it was a basket case. We're going to close the business. We had this solution, which was 500 legal documents and how-to guides, and it was all DIY. So anyone in a small business could come onto the platform and basically figure out how to do an employment agreement and so forth. And we couldn't sell a subscription for that. We couldn't sell it at $30 a month. We couldn't sell it at $5 a month. No one was interested. Until we added, plus you get unlimited calls with lawyers. And the business has gone incredibly well since then. And so there's something in that, which is, as humans, even these are business people who are cash poor, they want someone to help them. Now in law, it's a position of trust. People don't want to DIY necessarily the law because they're a bit scared of what might happen. So that's just an example of how, if we focus on the service, we can really, just use AI as a tool. In terms of, how do you elevate your client mindset, there's a lot of points here. I'm not going to go through them in great detail, but it's really, at its core, it's about flipping the way you think about what you do into how the stakeholder or the customer is thinking about it. And how would they like to receive it? How could you help them? So it's easy to say, it's very difficult to do because maybe that means doing something differently. And we did something great as an innovation project for one of the big engineering companies, Oricon. So they had a problem. Oricon, very innovative organisation, engineering organisation, 8,000 people around the world, always winning innovation awards. But in a tight labour market, they would go to get these great engineers and tell the engineers how innovative Oricon was. Terrific, we love innovation. But the very first real touch those candidates had with Oricon was a 25-page employment agreement. So would I be correct in assuming no one likes reading their employment agreement? That's the last thing you want to spend any time doing. And so Oricon recognised they had a problem. Their value was to be innovative, but actually they weren't walking the talk. And so we worked with them to create what was one of the world's first visual employment agreements. So we took 25 pages of written word and we reduced it to 3 pages of cartoons. And we're comfortable that it's enforceable, that it does everything that it needs to do, but we had to think differently. We had to think very differently because for a lawyer, they came in and they said, we want this to be shorter. And so I naturally thought, well, we'll just make the font smaller. That works every time. Just go to your car rental place. So, we can do this if we think about it in terms of, what does our customer want? Communication, how can we communicate and get impact? Because, it seems like everyone's got a megaphone these days, but no one's being listened to. And I just want to share something which my father said to me over 40 years ago. And I think this is really, very powerful statement, which is the greatest gift that you can give someone is your undivided attention. Now that might sound pretty hokey, but if you think about, the average conversations that you have in your workplace, someone's saying something, are you thinking about what they're saying, or are you thinking about what you're going to say when they stop talking? But if you can actually focus on what they're saying and give them that undivided attention, then you can really elevate the communication and the way that you can get to solutions. And so, there's a number of ways that you can do this. Obviously, practice active listening. There's a lot of stuff on the internet around that. At its core, it's just listening to people. And not interrupting them. People love to interrupt people. And what do people hate? People hate being interrupted. People hate that more than anything. And people do it every day. And using stories to connect. People love stories. I had I can remember when I was a young lawyer and I wanted some budget to go to a conference, and so I pitched it to this through our partner group. And it's like 5 partners in there. I'm like, it'd be great because there'll be this person here, and it was just stony. It was like, no. Okay, so and then one of the partners came to me afterwards and he gave me this great piece of advice. He said, when you're trying to pitch something like that, you got to think about what's in it for the person that you're pitching it to. What's in it for them? Like they don't. We'd all love to say that everyone cares about everyone. The reality in business life is people are very self-centered, and so if you are trying to pitch something, if you're trying to get some budget for a new records management solution, going in and telling them why it's going to make your life easier is not helpful, right? Why is it going to be great for them? Not just the business, because no one really cares about the business. They care, if we did this, then you could go to the board and tell them what a great thing it was. Now, maybe I'm just a little jaded after a few too many decades in business, but I believe that's the essence of good communication. Adaptability. So we are going to have to change. And people hate change. I get it, I understand, but change is going to happen. And there's this Eleanor Roosevelt quote, which is, it's kind of traumatic, but I love this quote. And it's, you gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You're able to say to yourself, I've lived through this horror. I can take the next thing that comes along. You must do the thing you think you cannot do. That's kind of a bit of a powerful statement for asking for more budget for a records management solution. But we've got to recognise that change, if we don't embrace it, it'll be foisted upon us. And it's going to be hard. It's always a bit hard. But, there's an old saying, it'll be right in the end. And if it's not right, it's not the end. And so when you're going through innovation processes, just recognise that, ultimately it will get there in some way or another. So in terms of how to actually live out adaptability, I'm a big believer when dealing with innovation is that, innovation is about making someone else's life better. So rather than making your own life better, how can you think about doing something in your workplace that would make someone else's life better? And big proponent of this idea of minimum viable product. And I ran our innovation program for the firm globally, so 8,000 people or 7,000 people. And you can imagine lawyers are not particularly fun people to change. They all have a bit of an opinion about things. And so very difficult to tell, a very well-paid partner out of New York that no, there was no budget for their wonderful innovation. So I had to come up with a plan as to how we could, legitimately do innovation in a big enterprise environment. And so minimum viable product is the way that all startups build their businesses. And so with LawPath, that's the way I built that business. And so it's the best way to explain it is the example of LawPath. So LawPath now provides legal support to 400,000 small businesses. But when I started it 10 years ago, I didn't immediately go, you know what, let's build a massive 2 million page website with all this functionality. And that's where innovation used to be. It's like big projects, based on big assumptions that maybe aren't correct. And so what we did using minimum viable product is to say, what is the smallest thing that we could do that would validate a hypothesis about why we think this business will work? And so my hypothesis was, I think that legal's very expensive and that small businesses don't go to lawyers because they're too expensive, but they might go and use a solution online and pay a subscription for it if it was cheap enough. That was the hypothesis. So rather than build anything, I just sent an email out to 2,000 small businesses. And I said, if I built something like, or if we built something like this, would you be interested? And we got a reasonable response rate. Once again, for anyone who's done direct mail stuff, you will recognise that response rates are low. But of the responses that we got, there was a sufficient number that made me think, okay, there's a business here. And so then went about building a very, very, very basic website, very basic, with very limited functionality, very cheap, and then tested it. Did that work? What do people like? What do people not like? Then we iterated and got to the business that we've got today. And so we can do that in everything that we do as far as innovation within our organisations. Everything can be done via minimum viable product. We don't need to go and blow our brains out on massive, big budgets unless we've proven that whatever the hypothesis is actually true, and that we've got the people who we're theoretically benefiting, which often is customers, that we've got their input and their buy-in, and we can believe that it'll happen. Leadership. So, I am a little bit concerned about what does AI mean for particularly middle management? Is it sort of, the way video killed the radio star? Is AI going to take out middle management? And I think that there's no doubt that management will have to change, but I think it's an exciting time because I think there will be, significant roles for managers and leaders, but I think we've really got to focus on what it means to be a leader and things like, what are those people skills? What's the emotional intelligence? Conflict resolution. As a leader within my organisation, I spend a lot of time trying to figure out how we get to everyone being happy and on board with ideas, team building, those sorts of things, strategic planning. I mean, if you've used generative AI, you'll know, I mean, it's dumb as a post, right? I mean, it can't figure out a strategy. It can come up with a strategy, but that strategy is just something that's put together using its algorithm. So it's helpful, but true strategic planning, you know, really needs to be done by humans, and also risk-taking, because, you know, in doing anything new, you've got to take a risk. And AI is not in the risk-taking game. You know, it's basing everything off what happened previously, off historical data. Ethics. So AI doesn't have a lot of ethics, although it is interesting. So ChatGPT, you can access it two ways. You can access it directly through ChatGPT, through OpenAI, or you can access it through Microsoft Bing. And I asked ChatGPT, give me 10 lawyer jokes. ChatGPT was like, yeah, fantastic. 10 lawyer jokes, no problems at all. I felt like it had 1,000 if I wanted them. And then I went on to Bing and used their ChatGPT solution. I said, you know, can I have 10 lawyer jokes, please? Because I always say please and thank you, because if they do take over the world, I just want them to... There's a lady who's like, I'm totally playing the long game here. Boy, have they got us scared. So I'm like, please, Mr. ChatGPT or Ms. ChatGPT, don't want to be gender specific, you know, can you give me 10 lawyer jokes? And I swear the response was, I'm sorry, I'm not able to provide content that would offend or upset members of the society. Which I felt like saying, it's lawyers, for heaven's sakes. We've been the butt of jokes since time immemorial. You can't offend a lawyer. But so that gives you a sense. So there's a trust and safety layer that goes across all technology that's available in the cloud. So there's parameters that are set for the solution, and clearly with ChatGPT through Bing, they said that. I actually put that out on LinkedIn that happened, and interestingly, about 2 weeks later, you know, the Bing ChatGPT was enabling lawyer jokes. So I feel like I've made the world a little bit better, or a little bit worse for lawyers. So I do think, you know, and also how do we manage AI in the workplace? So there's, you know, the hybridization of the workplace. I think there's, you know, lots of opportunity there. So in terms of activities, you know, leadership, you know, the biggest issue here, I think, is around, you know, fostering psychological safety is a huge one. Giving people a safe space within which to work, I think, has become so important. And for many of us who grew up in an environment where that wasn't necessarily the way that leadership was, that can be a challenge for some people. I think it's really important. I'm going to finish just on relationships. So how do we build relationships, genuine relationships in the digital age? And you know, this comes all the way back to where we started, which is those CEOs saying, everyone get back to the office and start getting around that water cooler and having those great innovative discussions that never actually happened in real life anyway. So, you know, what is the secret of creating relationships? And as you've seen, I'm very big on the idea of screen-based communications. I think they are the future. And you know, if you wanted to change your career this afternoon, here's my tip. Social media. Social media is absolutely a way to build relationships. And I appreciate there'll be, you know, some of you will be like, that stuff's rubbish. And, you know, a lot of it is. But there's elements of it, particularly LinkedIn, which are incredibly powerful. I'm just going to leave you with this story. So it was COVID times, and my son had COVID, and so that meant back in those days that the whole family was locked down for 7 days or whatever it was. And I'm the sort of person which is, it's not good to be in a confined space with me. My wife was not looking forward to that idea. And so I decided I better give myself a project. And so what I did was I created a video. It was a funny video, I thought, and it was based on The Price is Right, and it explained why NFTs, I don't know if you remember those things, non-fungible tokens, sort of a wacky thing that happened in the crypto world about a year and a half ago. People were paying millions of dollars for just what looked like JPEGs of things. Anyway, so I made what I called the NFT Price is Right. And so I was 7 characters, including, I'd always wanted to be a game show host. I was a game show host with my sparkly jacket. And so I put it out on LinkedIn. And I thought it was vaguely amusing. Interestingly enough, a couple of my partners at the office didn't really think it was that funny. And so it's a little bit of a grief about, you know what, Nick, this isn't really, you know, in line with the brand. It's a bit funny, isn't it? And so that was starting to get a little bit hot until this comment turned up from David Thodey. Many of you may remember David as the head of Telstra, and he's now a chairman of many boards in Australia. I don't know David, but David says, Nick, this is a great, inspiring, and creative look at the world of NFTs. Thanks, Nick. You are a national treasure. So there you go, one sparkly jacket and I'm Phar Lap. So the power of social media, I mean, particularly LinkedIn, but you know, if you in the younger demographics, other platforms as well, is incredible. And so Dave and I now have a relationship. He did a project for me the other day because I asked him to. So there's a great opportunity there. So with that, I will leave you with a QR code, and so that QR code, if you're interested, that will take you to, so there's my 2 books that I've written. So the one that would be interesting, I think, for some of you is Big Data, Big Responsibility. So basically running through the world of data and cybersecurity regulation in Australia. Looks like it might change sometime soon. And the other one, Digital Disruption. And also, if you're interested in Web3 and NFTs and Metaverse and getting trapped under chairs in Second Life, then I do a podcast called Web3 Goes Mainstream. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Wish you all the best for the rest of the conference and your future. Thank you.